This is PrepTest 123, Section 4, Passage 1, the divide between poetry and fiction in U.S. writing programs and one writer who refuses to pick a side. The difficulty level here is pretty low, it's pretty easy. The author's opinion's on the surface the entire time. But there is one distinction on the back end that the test will definitely build questions around, and most students blow right past it. Now, this is a humanities passage. The author thinks the wall between poetry and fiction is a cultural hangup, not a real literary boundary. And Rita Dove's work is the proof. That is your main point. You want to hold on to it. Now, the most important section is the back half, lines 38 to 55 if you're using the paper version of the test. Everything before it is setup. Everything in it is what the test cares about. If you gave the second half the same attention as the rest, go back and read it again, give it some more time. Now, paragraph 1 lays out the status quo. Poetry and fiction live in separate boxes. Writing programs train you in one or the other. The conventional wisdom says poetry handles inner states and feelings. Fiction says character and plot are the focus. And the author, of course, grants the distinction, says, yeah, they're different genres, but then look at the last sentence. It's a question. Why has this distinction turned into segregation? That's not a neutral question. That's the author saying this has gone too far. And you're going to know their position before you even leave paragraph 1. So read at normal speed. Don't get bogged down in the description of what each genre supposedly does. That is just context. Then paragraph 2 explains the cause. U.S. culture does not trust generalists. If you're good at more thing, people assume you're a dilettante, meaning you're a dabbler, you're not serious. Jack of all trades, master of none sort of thing. And that is the cultural attitude driving the split. But then the author turns a corner. They say this bias is shrinking. Recent writers are getting respected in both genres. And so this paragraph does two jobs. It diagnoses the problem, then it tells you the problem is already on its way out. So move through this fast. The cultural explanation here is just the background, it's not the argument. Paragraph 3 introduces Rita Dove. She is the proof that the trend is real. She's acclaimed in both poetry and fiction and finds the whole separation bizarre. She grew up loving both genres, studying in Germany, where writers cross genre lines constantly. And that detail about Germany is not decoration, it's there to show you that the US approach is a cultural choice, not some natural law of literature, saying other countries don't do this. But you're still in just the setup territory here. You're learning what Dove thinks. You haven't seen her work yet. So again, move through this at normal speed, don't camp out. But now you want to slow way down because this is the pivot. The author stops telling you what Dove believes and starts showing you what her writing actually does. And this is where most students lose the thread. The author says each genre shares in the nature of the other. Then you get a very specific breakdown of how Dove's poetry works. The language here is lyrical, it hits you emotionally, doesn't force a timeline. But buried inside that lyric language, she's laying down narrative details, like plot elements, character beats, and they build up until the poem is basically functioning as fiction. And then the author flips it. Dove's fiction uses poetic rhythms and, quote, elliptical expression, meaning compressed, clipped, leaving gaps the way poetry does. So her prose starts looking and reading like poetry. And so here's what you've got to lock in. Dove isn't just someone who writes poems and also writes stories. She creates something the passage calls lyric narrative. And that term is doing all the heavy lifting here. It means the genres aren't side by side in her work. They're fused and blended into the same piece. And that is a completely different claim than saying she's talented in two fields. So the key move here is the distinction between writing in both genres and fusing both genres within a single work. That is what the hardest questions will test. If you collapse those two ideas into one, you're going to pick wrong answers that sound close, but miss the point. Now, the author's stance here is fully committed. The poetry-fiction divide is cultural nonsense, and Dove's work proves genres can merge inside a single piece of writing. The main trap here is grabbing an answer that praises Dove for working in two genres, but leaves out the blending. And the answer is going to be there. It'll sound right, and it will describe something that's technically true about Dove, but not the author's actual point. It's more of a shallow version. So expect this to show up on the main point question and probably on the author's attitude question also. Before you get to the questions, you want to check yourself on three things. First, can you explain the difference between Dove writing in both genres versus fusing them together? Second, do you know why Germany shows up in this passage? And third, can you put lyric narrative in your own words without using any terms or vocabulary words from the passage itself?